and welcome to this week's Mailbox. And with BFA pre-patch coming very soon, systems for the next expansion pretty much set in stone. There's been a lot of comments to discuss concerning some of those main systems, which includes the Force personal loot, which includes class buffs, Azerite gear, and the dynamic between dungeons and raids for Battle for Azeroth. So, first of all, where's the mailbox from last week? The winners for that one are, well, winners is a bit of a misnomer because there's only really one. It was indeed Southport in Spires of Iraq. Is the only comment I saw guessing that one. So, it looks like I'm going to have to do an easy one this week. Get more than one person getting it. And if there's fewer than one person gets this one, then you're not even trying. So what you need to identify where that mailbox is. You need to identify the specific place as well as the zone it's in. So, let us get on with this week's comments. The first one, just a little reminder about the competition, which is drawing to its end now. Says, I don't think you went over this in the mailbox. I did. But it says, how will we know that you noticed our competition answers? So, a few weeks ago, I announced in a mailbox that I'd be doing a competition for basically a free mount. And there have been clues in various WoW videos. And the fourth one is coming up next week, or in the coming week. And you just need to simply state the comment in the original mailbox or in one of the videos where one of the clues appears. And I will see it. So I am checking those ones. And then, not this coming Azeroth review, because that's this coming Tuesday. But the one after it, on the 17th, is when I will announce the winners. I will put up a list of the winners as well, so people can just double check that they were in there. But it does close on the Monday before it, so don't just put it up on that Tuesday. And then we'll draw it live there. So that's how that's going to work. Right, okay. So, little comments. So the personal loot now. So we're at the point now where we're not really debating whether it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, really. We're just sort of talking about how it's going to work in practice. Oh no, this is about class buffs. Oh, mislabeled this one. So someone's saying, I'd still argue that in a perfect Mythic raid, you could cover your buffs. So this was talking about, okay, so it's not really so much the buffs, because there's two types of class buff. There's the buffs, which is straightforward. And then there's the debuffs, which can only realistically be brought by those classes. That's demon hunters and monks. It says, I'd still argue that a perfect Mythic raid, you could cover your buffs with tanks and healers, plus one mage, and then bring 8 warlocks and 8 rogues. I'm not sure that that would even be considered a perfect raid run. Oh yeah, this was about personal loot, the next statement, because I really don't think Method will do that. But I did talk in a video about personal loot some time ago about saying that to maximise distribution of loot, because some people still have it in their heads that this forced personal loot means that the old master looting techniques can't be used anymore. Of course they can. Of course they can. There's always a way to game loot. Always. It doesn't matter what Blizzard do. Within reason. It doesn't. They just have to stop it being tradable completely if they want to completely stop you gaming it. So the fact that you can trade it, as long as the piece you've got is not higher item level than the same piece of gear in a same slot. So obviously taking a narrower variety of classes. You wouldn't have to take the same class. Just ones that have very similar loot tables would work. And you absolutely wouldn't take 8 rogues. Rogues are really useful, of course. But, 8 warlocks and 8 rogues, why would you say 8 warlocks in that case? Why not boomkins? Because then they're both all wear leather. All the leather's up for grabs then if you're going to take rogues and something else. By taking rogues and warlocks, you're splitting up your cloth. But yeah, the personal, so it is about personal loot in the end. It says you no longer need perfect loot distribution during progress, so you can class stack like crazy. No, it was the other way around. You gain better loot distribution, and believe you me, Method and all the top guilds will be doing exactly that. I mean, Limit said very early on that they're going to be gaming this system. Of course they will. All the top guilds will. Even other guilds might take it into account. If they're deciding between, should we take this person or this person? Well, if we take this person, it might, all other things being equal, I'm not saying that this would be high on the priority of considerations, but all other things being equal, they might think, well, we'll take this person because we've got quite a lot of leather users. We'll take this leather user rather than this plate user, and that'll all work out. Because, yeah, let's say you've got a Guardian Druid and a Brewmaster as your 2 tanks, and you've got a couple of rogues, and you've got, several druids. Maybe there's a Feral Druid, a Resto Druid, a couple of Boomkins. You might have a Mistweaver Monk in there as well. Let's say you've got quite a few leather wearers. But your only plate user is maybe a warrior. You've got a DPS warrior there for the DPS buff, the attack power buff. Which, of course, you could take as a scroll, but it wouldn't be quite as good. But it wouldn't be far off. But still, you'd prefer to take the warrior. So then you're deciding, well, who do we take for our last slot? We've got, let's say you've got another rogue, say, or it could be anything. It could be another Feral Druid even. And you've got a Death Knight. Well, you might, in that situation, say, well, they're both as good as each other. They both do the same DPS. We don't need either of their utility on this fight. We'll take the Rogue or the Feral Druid or whatever it happens to be because, bit of leather, more chance of getting some loot distribution. So, but with that loot distribution, as I say, the top guilds will use whatever will get them the best loot distribution anyway. This is the argument I was saying before, but again, we're not talking about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, just how it will work in practice. Now, for a lot of guilds, of course, the majority of guilds, it won't be worth trying to game it. And I suppose that's one of the benefits of it, that it gets rid of the sheer number of guilds that would do split raiding. It doesn't get rid of split raiding. It lessens the benefit to the point where it's not worth it for a lot of guilds, because it's like anything else. In fact, this is going to be a theme that's going to be coming up. There's a video I keep intending to make. Maybe I'll get time to do it today, although it'll probably come out on Patreon and then at the end of the week on YouTube. But it's going to be part of a series. But it's all about, when you're deciding whether to do a thing that has drawbacks. You've got benefits on one side, you've got drawbacks on the other. Let's try and get that in shot. When the benefits are above it, it's worth doing. But when it doesn't, and there's 2 ways to affect that calculation. One is you can increase the benefit, or you can increase or decrease in terms of wanting to do it. Decrease the drawbacks. So split runs were worthwhile for the last couple of expansions because the benefits were that you were literally getting twice. If you could get everyone to have an alt and do your normal and heroic before you went into your mythic and split raid it. You were getting at least close to double the loot. It might not be quite double the loot because, a couple of things, but one of which might be you might not do a full clear, at least on heroic, with your split race, depends how good your alts were. But you're getting way more gear and therefore better gear distribution. The drawbacks were you needed people to have alts, but they didn't need to be terribly good. Because remember, the people that are doing this were mythic raiders, and this was just for, the normal would be a breeze, and heroic, even with half alts, even if as long as they were okay and half mains, you'd still generally get most of the way through, and for a lot of guilds, all the way through. And the drawback was just simply having an alt, but with so much catch up and gear and stuff like that, it's not that bad to do it. It's not that difficult. Whereas with BFA, what they've done is they haven't made it any harder to get those alts ready for split raids. So the drawbacks are pretty much where they were. It's just the benefit is now less because you have got less. You still might just about get a little bit of extra gear out of it. But instead of it being an extra 20 pieces of gear, say, or something like that, or it might be far more, it's like maybe 1 or 2 if you're lucky, because what you've got to be for that alt to be able to trade any gear, because that's ultimately what it is. You want the alt in there to get gear, but to give it to your mains. The only way the alt can do that is maybe on the first boss they get some wrists. Oh, great, fancy. Can't trade them. Sorry, it's highest item level I've got. But then a few bosses later, there's another pair of wrists, and they get those, and it doesn't Warforge or Titanforge or anything. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I can now trade these. But, the chance of that happening is slim. It might happen. And as a result, you might get a little bit, 1 or 2 pieces. But it's no longer worth it because now the benefit is much lower and it's not really worth the drawback. For most guilds, for some it is. And as I say, you can increase your chances of being able to trade loot, even between mains realm, because it's not always about trading that loot from the outs to the mains, sometimes within the mains. And again, if you have very similar loot tables for most of the raid, then those people will be able to trade it more quickly. It'll be quicker before they can trade it. Whereas you take a rogue, if you're a lone rogue in your roster, for example, and you want daggers, then, you know, the daggers are only going to drop for you, or maybe there's two rogues even. It's only going to drop for each other. So it's going to take much longer before you're able to trade those daggers, because you've got to get one yourself first, but you can get another one. Whereas if you're talking about, I don't know, a caster trinket, then, you know, someone is bound to get one within the first week if you've got like 10 casters in your raid or more. And at that point, you're going to say, well, then from the next week on, as long as it's at Warforged or Titanforge, if they get a caster trinket, it doesn't have to be the same one, they'll be able to trade it. So that's likely to happen much more quickly. Anyway, we've waffled on enough about that one. Right, next one. This is the actual class buffs one. So it says, for an enhancement, I assume that's supposed to be a comma there, but enhancement ret sounds fantastic. And to the DKs that need a Demon Hunter and Monk to perform in Mythic, they need to remove or spread the buff and turn it into 5% power. I think what this is probably talking about is the fact that, in theory, particularly applies to melee, but not exclusively melee. But if your damage is a mixture of physical and spell damage, and there's a significant amount of each, not necessarily half, but a significant amount of each, then, I mean, it's mostly spell damage for paladins, it's mostly spell damage for shamans. Pretty sure it probably is for Death Knights as well, but I can't swear on that for both specs. Then you want both to actually increase, like for a mage to increase their damage by the 5%, they really just need the Demon Hunter to put the spell damage debuff on their target. For someone who just does pure physical damage, say Warrior, then again, it pretty much is only Warrior, isn't it, in that bow? Everyone else does at least some spell damage, don't they? Pretty sure that's the case. Anyway, so if you were a Warrior, you really only need the Monk's debuff as well to do most of yours. Whereas others, you need a mixture of the both. So in theory, that could make you higher maintenance. However, it's really just a case of what you've got in your roster. If you happen to have both covered in your roster, it's not really a problem, because you'd expect both debuffs to be there anyway. You know, whether it's coming from on tanks or DPS or whatever. It's still, if you've got both, it doesn't matter that you need both. And obviously, if you're going to be missing one of them, well, you're still going to be missing one. If your raid just doesn't have a monk, it doesn't have a monk, you don't have one in your roster, then, okay, you could argue that an enhancement of ret and a DK going, oh, well, you know, I'm only benefiting the spell damage. Well, pity the poor warrior. They get no benefit at all. They get nothing. Nothing at all. So, you know, I don't see it as a major issue personally. I understand. Again, this is one of these things, and people worry about certain systems in BFA. There's some systems I worry about in BFA. I'm not here to say everything's going to be fine, but there are some systems in BFA that people are worried about because of hypothetical situations or theoretical things that are just not real in practice. The fact that you need both debuffs, yes, makes those, the majority of melee specs and hunters you could lump into there as well, higher maintenance, because we need both instead of just one that everyone else would need. But we're probably going to have both. We might have to give up our raid spot for the both to get into the raid for everyone else, but, you know, the raid is very likely to have both. So I don't worry too much about that, really. Next one, Azerite traits. So it's really, I think, the second part of this. I'll read it all. It says the 3 pieces, I think this is relating to the 3 pieces of up to 3 pieces of gear that drops, but it may not be. It may be referring to the fact that you've got 3 Azerite pieces. There's another carrot on stick. I'm getting sick of this. I understand the games need RNG, but RNG everywhere is so annoying. Worst of all is, what are they going to release tokens to get gear end of expansion like essences? So I'm not worried too much about that. It says making my chasing of the carrot feel pointless. Is this? I mean, this first bit I think may be talking about. Don't worry, this isn't the bit that I wanted to talk about. Catch-up gear. Well, catch-up gear has been in the game since like forever. Not quite forever, but pretty close to it. So that always happens anyway. The gear, you can be in the most awesome gear while Uldir's going on. Sorry, Uldir is going on, and if you stop gearing up 6 months later, it's all crap. I mean, I did the same. When I first quit the game, I mean, to this point, it's the only time I've quit the game, but for the first time I quit the game, it was just before Uldir. I didn't know Uldir was going to be good. I just saw that, Wrath up to that point was a load of crap for a raider. But I had the best gear, and that you could get in the game. There was no Warforge or anything like that then, so it's quite easy to get the best gear. If you completed every single raid boss in the first week when you dinged, by the time the next tier came out, it was pretty easy to have all the best gear. And then I quit. But then I came back, but only on a very casual basis. It wasn't to come back to raid properly. It was just, because I had nothing else to play. And my gear was trash. Utter trash. Couldn't even get into a pug to do the simplest of things. And that's just the way the game is. And it has been for many years. It says, also the Azerite traits are so underwhelming. Now, this is what I want to tackle here. It's just X amount of mastery here or percentage speed there, 2k shield for you. It's not. I don't know why people keep saying this. I could maybe understand why people were saying it a while ago when they'd only released a few traits. But now we've seen them. It's not that at all. There are some of those. And there are also ones that change your playstyle, that might even change your priority system. There are ones that do what, like the old legendary, or I say old because it's still current. Stop saying old. The current tier and legendary effects do. Not as powerful as the legendary effects. And, Blizzard said they want it to be roughly as powerful as 2-set bonus. Well, if you've got several of them in the stack, then maybe. But yeah, there's several traits that aren't just adding something to a stat. You think about it this way. Think about it, again, people keep thinking, well, Azerite traits are there to replace this or that or that. They're here to replace artifact traits. That's it. They're the new artifact trait system. The fact that legendaries has gone doesn't mean that Azerite traits are here to replace legendaries. Legendaries are gone because people didn't like the legendary system. Some people did, a lot didn't. And they're not really here to replace set bonuses either, because it's not a set bonus. You just need one piece. There's no, you get this trait, but if you've got this trait on the other piece of Azerite gear, you get an extra bonus. There's none of that, so it's not there to replace tier. Tier's gone because it doesn't work with Azerite gear. They're two mutually exclusive systems. You can't really marry them both together. There's not enough gear slots to accommodate both systems. Even if you knocked tier back down to 5 at that point, well, okay, you could in theory if you change which pieces were the Azerite pieces or the tier pieces, but then there'd be no non-set gear. You'd just be wearing tier gear and Azerite gear, and that'd be it. There'd be no slots free. So that's not what it is either. It's there to replace the artifact traits. If you look at the artifact traits, some of those artifact traits changed abilities. A lot of them just straight up added damage or stats or something like that. And it's the same with Azerite traits. There's quite a lot of them. Yes, just do increase a stat or give you something else, like a shield under certain situations, something fairly dull and boring. But there are also ones that change your abilities up, that make them do something a little bit different. So I'm not sure where people keep getting this from. I really don't understand why people are not actually looking at the trait. I mean, maybe it's just spreading around because some person said it 3 months ago, and it just keeps doing the rounds, and no one's actually bothering to look up what they're actually like. And it's not just me. I mean, I've looked at a few as well because I've leveled a few. I've been leveling a Death Knight up recently, and I can see that there's traits that I'm getting just from leveling content. Never mind the stuff you get from dungeons and raids. That's changing the way my abilities work. They're not just adding damage to it or proc chances or anything like that. It's straight up changing what it does. It says, I do got to admit this X-Pack looks very nice visually. Art team is on top of it, as they often are. It says, I agree on the rewards. We need more cosmetics like Heritage Armor for all races. Yeah, but what you've got to do for them, though, is ridiculous. I think their surprise would be Magoroks and Dwarfs pre-patch. Well, the first time they introduced them, they gave the very strong impression that it would be possible to get those races. But now it doesn't look like it does because you've got to do the war campaign, which you can't do with a pre-patch. So I'm not sure about Magarox and Dark. I think it's just that they are going to be available at the start, but you're going to have to go through the war campaign to still get access to them. In fact, I'm sure that's the case now, because I think we can people have actually tried out the starting stuff for those races. I haven't bothered though. I'm not that bothered about Magarox, and Dark Iron Dwarfs. Well, I've gone Horde now. So, Mage Tower. So, of course, you know, there's a lot of people being able to do the Mage Tower now, especially since our artifact instability came in. It says, I think the Mage Tower tuning, because so I was talking about the fact that there's certain ones that would basically death if you failed them, certain mechanics. I can only really speak about the Sigrin one, because that's the only, although technically I've done the tank one as well. I didn't really know what was going on, because I did it before the instability thing, but nonetheless, still at a point when I had Mythic and Taurus gear, so it was a piece of piss. There's only one encounter where I actually know what's going on. The only one I did while my gear still allowed it to be something of a challenge. Even though something like that is always going to be of necessity, relatively, I'll say, straightforward for Rets, because we're very good at solo stuff. And if you're going to make the encounter doable by other specs, then of course Rets are going to be on top of it. So yeah, so I was saying that the fact is, that apparently, I mean, I can't say personally, but people have told me that they can stand in these things now and not get killed. You can just take it as like half your health, because we've got so much stamina now. So they're saying, I think the Mage Tower tuning was meant to allow for defensive abilities to save you, so they couldn't make the damage a guaranteed one-shot. This is why stamina creep has ruined the danger. I don't know, it seems a bit weird, because it did one-shot. There were certain mechanics that one-shot at the time. None of my defensives would have really done much good. Bubble obviously would have done, but that only works once. So, I suppose it could have been deliberate, because even though they said at the start, they said that although gear will help make it easy as you go through, it will still always remain a challenge. Now, I took that to mean that obviously with extra gear, you'd be able to beat the encounter more quickly. Things will die more quickly, all the rest of it. I've not done the healing challenge, but I imagine there's some healing to do on that. You can heal things up more quickly, maybe that shortens it as well. But the danger should still be there. Otherwise, if it's not, then you're not having to learn the mechanics to the same extent. So, I don't know. But it's also possible that although they said that, what they actually intended was for it to roll up to the point where it is very, very easy at the end, knowing full well that a lot of the stuff that makes it challenging to begin with would be, I'm going to say largely, because I don't know from experience, largely null and void, with massive, 3 times the stamina we've probably got now? I don't know exactly. But I've got about 7.5 million health now. I don't know how much health I had when the Mage Tower first came out, but I'm going to guess that it wouldn't have been more than 3 million. And may have been less. I don't know. Anyway, there's that one. Right, okay, on to more systems now. Now, so what they're doing here is Azerite gear. Now, if you do normal or heroic dungeon, Azerite gear can drop from the bosses, of course. But if you're doing Mythic Plus, and you get your cash at the end, and the chest at the end drops, potentially, not guaranteed anything, but it potentially drops some loot from one of the boss's loot tables in that dungeon. And then you do your Mythic Pluses. And as long as you do at least one Mythic Plus, the following week you get to open your Mythic Cash chest, and there will be a guaranteed piece of loot, and potentially up to 3 pieces, but a guaranteed piece of loot that drops from, again, any old dungeon loot table. So what they're going to do with this is the chest you get at the end of a dungeon cannot drop Azerite armor. You can only get that from the Mythic Plus. On Mythic Plus. So saying here, of course, they're locking the damn Azerite gear behind the RNG crap that is the weekly chest. Not only can you not go for it for the instances where the items you want drop from, but it's complete RNG, what instance, boss, and if you get any at all. Now, there are pros and cons to this. Obviously, I'm guessing this person sees it as a con, and I can see that. It is certainly true that it increases the amount of RNG, because you're only getting 1 shot a week, whereas someone who can do lots of dungeons can increase their chances. it also prevents you farming the specific pieces you wanted, which is a little bit naughty because Blizzard did say it was farmable, the Azerite. Because people, and I know what they were covering. They were covering the idea that the Azerite traits would not be random on pieces of gear. That's what they were talking about. But the implication was also that you'd be able to target the dungeons that drop the Azerite gear you want. And that's not the case. It is the case from normally heroic, and while those are the appropriate dungeons for you to do, then at that point it is farmable. But as soon as you're into Mythic Plus, it's not. So I totally get that. That being said, there are advantages. For me personally, the system would be a good one, because I don't want to run lots and lots of dungeons. Because here would be the situation. If you could target it in dungeons, like specific dungeons, then that means you would have to. You'd have to be, and with Mythic Plus again, because the item level, there's several item level points depending on the key you do, the keystone. So I'd be having to spend time every week trying to find people with the key to the dungeons I want to do and get and persuade them to let me in that group to do them. That would be a monumental pain in the arse, because at that point you create a difficulty for a raid. Although obviously as a raider we'll hopefully be just wanting our Azerite gear from raids. So maybe I should actually just say from a non-raider, actually it's even worse now that I think about it, that you're having, even let's say you like doing Mythic Plus dungeons, but you've got to find the specific ones, the specific keys, and get people to let you join those groups to be able to get the gear you want. And it's a case of rich get richer, poor get poorer perhaps as well, because if you play a class that's not terribly de rigueur for high Mythic Pluses, you will struggle to get yourselves into those groups, and that means you have less chances to get the gear, which means your gear also falls behind and all the rest of it. Just a terrible cycle. So there are downsides if they did allow it to be farmable like that. But I also agree, it depends it depends on your point of view. It's not a terribly elegant system either way, because there are problems either way. It says here, people complain about the ridiculous RNG that the game have become the last few expansions. Now this has to be done out of spite. It's not done out of spite. It's done for the reason, I'm sure they haven't said, but I'm quite sure it's been done for the reasons I've just talked about. The fact that some people simply wouldn't be able to target those dungeons. Quite a lot of people, in fact. Because the RNG is on the keystone you get. That's where the RNG would be there. So you don't get rid of the RNG, it's still there. You just swap it from one thing to another. Now that's not saying that I think it's all fine what they've done, because I understand that someone who would be up for just doing Dungeons is going to be their thing, and they're fine. They're in a guild that does Mythic Plus Dungeons, they're in a Mythic Plus Dungeon or community or whatever, and they fancy their chances of being able to get into whatever group that has the key that they'd want, because they're awesome and they play a class that's really good. I can understand from their point of view that would be less satisfactory. And it says, out spite, because no person with any decency would do something like this. No, they are actually doing this for the majority of people. This actually benefits the majority of people. I think you've just not seen it because it doesn't benefit you, if we're honest. Right, let's have a look. What's this one on? Oh yeah, the gear lock in dungeons again. So it says, not sure though, tuning unavoidable abilities in an endless scaling system makes it either non-existent or just a band-aid fix. Maybe they should try percentage damage on unavoidable. So what we're talking about here is, so again, this is all, coming to the fact that you can't change gear in Mythic Plus Dungeons in BFA. And one, thing to talk about is certain bosses, what they do, like Xavier at the end of Dark Art, I think it was a classic example. At certain, high level, they'll do an ability and it just does massive amount of damage. And some people will just be one-shot by it. There's nothing they can do. And some people will have something they can do about it. But what I was talking about, of course, my explanation is, well, this is a fault of class design, the fact that some classes have something to deal with it and some don't. And it's not like it's not like the first boss in Eye of Ashara, for example, where you can get someone else to jump in front of the spear. like, you know, I can use that with bubble or put bop on someone. It's not like you've got that option. This is something that's just going to randomly hit someone, nothing anyone can do about it. And you're basically saying to that person, right, your gear might be good as everyone else's, your skill might be as good as everyone else's, but you can't do this boss and they can. Which is, for my money, deeply unfair. And that's an issue of class design. Or, you know, they could just not put those abilities in. But I was also saying, but, you know, if you push it high enough keys to the point where everyone will be one-shot by it, then it's okay. It just means you pushed it too high. So someone's saying here, maybe they should just try percentage damage on unavoidable. So something you can't do anything about. Instead of it doing a certain amount of damage, it does a certain percentage of your health damage. You know, I mean, that could work. It says, but to be honest, for me, it's more fun to gear and spec in a certain way to survive boss mechanics or play an OP class which can survive anyways. But yeah, the thing about that is, yes, of course. I mean, the people who tend to be the least open to changes like this tend to be the ones who just want to play the game. They don't give a shit about their character. And they'll play whatever character, they'll play whatever class, whatever spec. And that's fine. But there are those of us who have a particular one in mind because it's a role-playing game. And it doesn't matter that we tend to say MMO these days as opposed to MMORPG. It's still a role-playing game, even though we don't say the last three letters so much anymore. And you should feel that you can invest all of your time into one character and class and play that. And that role as well, the role that comes with it. And that should be fine because it is a role-playing game. That should be rule number one. You know, that should be right at the top of all game design. If you're designing a role-playing game, that should be, you know, etched into everyone's desk or workspace at the games company. It says, on the other hand, percentage damage will screw those in the daily heroic. Imagine gear, tank, and fresh healer. That healer will take ages to top off that tank for the next spell. There is that too, but also I don't think we have to worry too much. Again, when you're designing things, I don't think you need necessarily worry about designing it so that people with wild disparity in gear to be accommodated, because, you know, in any group activity, you sort of ideally want to be in a group of common purpose, and that means roughly of equal ability, skill, gear, all the rest of it. Yes, of course, we know that you're going to find yourself in a situation where it's not going to be like that, but I don't think we should have to do too much to try and compensate for that. But yes, that would be a disadvantage. I will agree. That would be a disadvantage. I'm hoping that this daily heroic is something just like in Legion that we largely sacked off after a while. So that doesn't have to happen. It says, oh yeah, and in a world where we all have classes balanced and similar, the non-gear change will be okay for survival purposes, but that's what it should be. And also, the important thing to say here is, like I've been saying, you know, when people try and look at a change to a system, and they imagine how it would have been in Legion and go, oh, it would have been awful. Yes, but it's not supposed to be for that. It's supposed to be in BFA. And it's not just me saying that. Blizzard said that. Ian Hazacosta said that. He said that in BFA it will work because we're, oh dear, doing these other things. And he says, you know, we're taking this into account with our encounter design, class design. He's actually said that. So if at the end of it, and also I'm going to temper this with the news, you know, newsflash, that even in Legion for Mythic Plus Dungeons, if you're pushing high ones, there were already certain classes and specs that was like, oh, we really want these, and other ones it's like, no way, not even going to try. That was already the case anyway. So the fact that if that exists in BFA doesn't prove anything. But if the particular change seems to create extra problems in battle for Azeroth, that will be down to Blizzard's incompetence, really, because they have gone out in line and said that it will work with the systems of BFA. The way that Mythic Plus is going to work in BFA, this change will work with it. It's all, you know, designed as a single thing. So we can hold them to that. And now on to the future of Mythic Plus, really. So it's Mythic Plus is cannibalizing all established content that people expected from WoW, and if they keep privileging it, I imagine this means the, you know, what appears to be quite large and high level gear you can get from it so severely, I doubt this bodes well for the game's future. Now, a couple of things I'll say here. So first of all, yes, certainly this idea that you can get multiple pieces of Mythic raid quality gear from doing a +10 stroke +15, depending on which patch you're on. That means that you are going to be able to get some really good gear from Mythic Plus dungeons. In terms of item level, you are absolutely going to be able to compete with Mythic Raiders, even Mythic Raiders that don't do a lot of Mythic Plus dungeons, which I'm intending to be me. And when I say competitive, I might even say beat. That is certainly true. However, about it not boding well for the game's future. Now, I would say that it wouldn't bode well for me in the game's future because it's raiding that I enjoy. And again, there's a series going to be coming out quite soon on where I discuss my role with it. But for the game itself, if, as some people have already noted, Blizzard decide that actually Mythic Plus is more accessible than raiding, more watchable, you know, the MDIs, more watchable than raiding. No one really. I know they sometimes had these head-to-head raids at BlizzCon, but it's not really that exciting, is it? Even for raiders, it's not really that exciting. So, you know, but if Mythic Plus is more entertaining to watch, more accessible to play, and because you've got the pushing the high keys and the affix and stuff like that, it's also something where you've absolutely got to say there's definitely challenge in there. So let's say Blizzard, just if, big old if here, but let's say Blizzard said, yeah, we're okay if more people are going to do the Mythic Plus, it's easier for them to design not only the Mythic Plus dungeons than it is to do all the raid encounters they have to do. It's easier to design classes and balance classes around dungeons than it is for raids, I think, especially Mythic raids. In a situation like that, if they decided to just let it fall, let the coins fall where they will, and if Mythic Plus dungeons is what people are doing, then go with it. I don't think it's going to be bad for the game's future. I think it'd be bad for me. I think it'd be bad for other people that really want to do the raiding. But I don't think it would necessarily be bad for the game's future. As loath as I am to say that, I think it's, you know, it is more accessible, it is more watchable. There's a lot of benefits on them deciding to move. And maybe, let's say, I mean, I don't know how long World of Warcraft's got to rumble on, but let's say it's still got a bit of time to rumble on. Let's say there's a time where they decide, let's drop Mythic raiding. Let's have heroic and normal raids and LFR. Let's just drop Mythic raiding. And Mythic Plus dungeons are our end game. Now, do I think they'd go down that road? I don't know. But would it ruin the game it ruined the game for some people, but would it actually ruin it in terms of numbers? I really don't think it would. I don't think it would. I don't know, though. Next one. Oh, hello. Specific question. What is your confidence level that Blizz will effectively reflect the true value of gear in BFA item levels? Will we still need sims outside of WoW to truly assess gear? On to the second point, yes, you will. It's going to be better. Primary stats are now going to be worth more than secondary stats. I can't speak for every single spec, but I gather that is going to be the case for every single spec. But that doesn't mean to say item level is still king. You know, if there's a large... I mean, with haste, of course, you get a lot of people get breakpoints with haste. So that can artificially inflate haste. The GCDs, ironically, the fact that they put more stuff on the GCD can also artificially inflate haste as well. So haste will be a big thing for some classes, for some specs. Rings will still obviously be a thing because they don't have the primary stat on, so we understand that. So you're still going to have to do for that. And trinkets, again, you're not going to be helped. But even for gear that just has traditional primary stats and secondary stats on, the secondary stats, there might still, for some specs, be a big difference between your top two secondary stats and your worst two. But either way, you are still going to need to sim. And it should be straightforward. Raidbots 2.0 is such an easy way to do it. You know, it uses SimCraft. It's based on SimCraft, so you know it's up to date. The top theory crafters have developed that, so you know it's as accurate as any system you can get anywhere else, and more accurate, in fact, than any other. But at the same time, it's a nice, easy-to-use user interface. But you will still need to sim if you want to min-max. If you don't, then it doesn't matter. Let's see now. So I was talking about the fact that I was a little disappointed. There was a couple of comments about this, actually, that there were no unique class-based Azerite traits on the Azerite gear from raids. Now, some people had pointed out, which is a very good comment, I might have mentioned this last week, that with Uldir being the first raid, and if tier gear was still in, it wouldn't drop tier gear. So maybe we're going to get something a bit more special in the first, what would be considered the raid that would have dropped tier gear. So that's certainly true. But then they're saying here, the raid Azerite gear has an extra row, doesn't it? It does. And that certainly would make it better than the dungeon stuff. So the way it works, just to go through for those who may not know. So your normal Azerite gear that you'd get from either questing or dungeons or whatever. So you've basically got 3 dials. So the first one is a class-based one. So you get 1 generic trait that you can choose from, or 1 trait for each of the specs you have, which usually buffs an ability. Sometimes it's an interesting buff, sometimes it's not so interesting, but it buffs an ability. And that sometimes reduces which ones you can pick for your spec. And it does mean if you pick one that's specific to your spec, it makes that piece of Azerite gear not as useful at all for another spec. Because if that other spec doesn't have that ability or doesn't gain the same benefit from that trait, then... But anyway, never mind. So you get class 1. Then your second row is usually a defensive-minded one. It's something that either gives you some minor defensive, and it's very minor, or speed boost under certain conditions, or straight up speed boost. Something like that. It's like a speed or a defensive type thing. And then your third one is just buffing up the item level. Just like the Netherlight Crucible, it's only in reverse this time. The item level boost is right at the... You need the highest as an artifact power to get that, as opposed to being the first one. Now, it's true that raids get an extra row in there. So you still get your class-based one, and you still get your sort of defensive stroke movementy one, and you still get your item level one. But in amongst there towards the top, between the first and what would be the second for the other ones, you get another one, and it does buff your throughput. Okay? You know, usually it gives you a boost to a secondary stat or something like that, or throughput, something to improve your healing, or defensives, or whatever. So it definitely makes it more powerful than just straight up dungeon loot, because it's got the extra row and it is useful. It's not very interesting though. In fact, if you're going to go back to that comment about them just being not very interesting, it's the extra raid row that's not very interesting, but it would be useful and it would make the raid gear more powerful. And if that's all Blizzard meant by it, then okay, it's true. It's disappointing, because I was hoping for some unique specs that would change the gameplay a bit like tier set bonuses did. From that extra row, and that's not what we've got. But it is true, and it does help as well, as I say, because although I was talking earlier about potentially having to farm, and I had to correct myself, of course, farming different dungeons for Azerite gear if they dropped from the chest at the end of Mythic Plus for raiders, because it wouldn't really apply to raiders, because you'd hope to get your gear from the raids, and it should be better than the stuff from Mythic Plus. And that's probably what's going to help the Mythic raiding stay a little bit special. The fact that your Azerite gear has that extra row on it. Because at the moment, I see that as being the only thing. And if people aren't all... But the problem is, I say it's not very inspiring. And although if people concede that, yeah, it makes it more powerful, but it's not very interesting, it might not be as big a draw as it could be. Right, on to the last couple. We've probably been going for a while, actually. I've not been keeping a check on the time, though. So, again, this is to do with the Azerite trait. So it's if they don't add unique, powerful traits to the next raid when difficulty increases, then the reward situation in Mythic raiding could enter crisis. So, again, that's what I was just leaving off there. There is going to be this thing, yeah, and again, it's all to do with that thing I was talking about before, benefits and drawbacks. You know, people can look for their end game, for their PvE end game. What do they want to do? Mythic Plus dungeons, raiding, Mythic raiding. And I can see an awful lot of people who would be perfectly capable of doing Mythic raiding at a high level, looking at the situation and going, but do you know what? Mythic Plus dungeons are fun. I can do them whenever, because if you're in a guild that does, like if you're in a guild that does Mythic raiding, as I am, then you need your set times, because you need those 20 people together, and the 20 right people together, or at least a decent setup. It's not necessarily always going to be your best, but your decent setup. So that means you need to schedule certain times of the week. Whereas if you're in a guild that just does Mythic Plus, I'm not going to say you completely YOLO it. There'll be certain times when it's going to be beneficial to arrange to do those runs, but it can be very much more ad hoc than it can be for Mythic raiding. And people might see the benefit in that. I'd certainly see the benefit in that, I've got to confess, because that'd be fantastic. Because it also means, let's say you just need to, like, for example, this Wednesday is our raid. We do the reset. We're definitely raiding this Wednesday. England are playing in the World Cup. Semi-finals. The first time we've been in the semi-finals for 28 years. Will I be watching that game? No, I'll be raiding. Whereas if it was like, you know, the Mythic Plus guild type thing, I would go, do you know what? Because it's not fair for me to say I need to cry off that to watch the England game, even though it's an event that only happens once every 3 decades. But in a Mythic Plus dungeon group, it'd be like, I know we usually do a dungeon at that time, but, you know, England are playing. That would be much more understandable. Because you just go, well, let's try another time then. Or just get someone else, whatever. So, yeah, I can certainly see the drawbacks of Mythic Plus raiding are way less than Mythic raiding. Mythic Plus dungeons, way less than Mythic raiding. If I didn't say that, I don't think I did. But the benefits, you know, what are your benefits? I mean, you know, most Mythic raiders, I'm sure, are not motivated by gear. But some are. Some are. And even those who aren't directly motivated by gear sometimes are motivated by special snowflake. They like to feel special. They do the Mythic because they like to feel special. And it is more difficult to feel special with the raiding when all you get is a scabby extra disc that says, oh, you get this stacking buff to haste. Which is nice. But, you know, is that it? Right, on to the last one. So this was actually on a Ret Paladin video that I did. I did this one quite late on. But it does my head in this sort of thing. So you don't have to understand Ret Paladins here. But someone is basically saying, I brought out a video yesterday where I talked about some upcoming changes to Ret Paladins that aren't on the beta yet. Or on the PTR. And they're saying, you keep saying Inquisition, which is one of our abilities, overtuned and will be nerfed, but I don't necessarily agree. And they go into a whole load of things. But it's just, I just need to say again, I keep saying this. It's not a matter of my opinion. I understand that the vast majority, if not almost everyone, not everyone, but almost everyone that does YouTube videos on World of Warcraft are making shit up. They're offering their opinions, even if it's stated as facts, or they just know they're making it up. I get that. When I'm talking about Ret Paladins especially, if I say something is my opinion, then it is my opinion. If I say this is going to happen, then it's going to happen. And I've got that information from the design team. But it does my head in. You know, you say a thing, because I disagree quite strongly with Blizzard's lack of communication with the community on a whole range of things. But, and you know, and there's the different levels to it as well. There's first of all a lack of communication. And then the next level up there, which I also disagree with, is a lack of engagement. But I'd rather have the communication with no engagement than not having either, if they really don't want to engage. So I think it's beholden upon me to try and provide some of that information. They don't release an awful lot of information on what they're doing, because, of course, loudmouths like me are going to tell everyone. But it's particularly annoying when I go to all the trouble of trying to find things out, which is not actually as difficult as it seems, actually. But still. And then people are still thinking it's an opinion. No, Inquisition's going to be nerfed. The class designer has said so. They've talked about 7 changes that are coming up that are not in there yet. And I explained a few of them, the more interesting ones, yesterday. They're all facts. Now, of course, you know, and this has happened before, between them saying that and something actually going live, they might change their mind. But nonetheless, if I say that this is happening or this is a thing, then I haven't made it up. I've got it directly from the horse's mouth. So I just need to get that one in there. So there we are. That's that for another week. That seemed to go on for quite a while, but I didn't check the time, so I don't know. There were certainly quite a lot of questions in there. We are getting quite close to pre-patch now. You know, my information was, and it doesn't seem to have changed, that it's coming out on the 17th for North America, 18th for Europe. By which time I'll be off. But next weekend I'm going to be doing a massive push on the Ret guide. So try to keep the comments interesting this week, because I'm not going to scrabble around for them. And also remember that on that 17th in the Azeroth review is when I'll be drawing the winners to the Mount competition. I am told by someone that to gift it you have to have been Battle.net friends for 10 days or something. I hope that's not true. If it is, then it means that the winner will have to make sure you're on Battle.net, and you might have to wait a couple of weeks before I can actually gift it. But, you know, hopefully it'll all be fine. And hopefully it'll be a little bit quicker, but I don't know. I've not been able to see anything like that written, but I need to check up again in Blizzard's things. So I hope you enjoyed the mailbox. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if this is your first time here, and share with other people who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.